Good morning, everyone. Hope you're all having a wonderful day today. Today, we're going to be taking a look at the new solar offering from Holosun. This is the SCRS. Now, before we get into the video, I do want to shout out Callaway Ballistics because I believe every shot that you're going to see in this video, unless I put in some other clip from another video, is all going to be Callaway Ballistics 220 grain subsonic ammo, as well as some 194 grain borax 300 blackout ammunition, all of which was supplied by Callaway Ballistics to the channel, and for that I am greatly appreciative. They're one of the only two people in the gun industry that I actually care about, the others being my Subscribe Star members, which are of course the best gentlemen around. Now, full disclosure on the Holosun SCRS is that I have absolutely no relationship with Holosun. I paid my own money for this. However, I do have access to dealer pricing through a third-party distributor. So while I didn't pay full price for this optic, I didn't get it from Holosun, and I don't talk to them, and they don't talk to me. Now, getting into the basics of the SCRS, this is the RD-2, which is the red 2 MOA dot version, which is the best version because it's the cheapest version. This one here is 2 MOA dot only, so it doesn't have the extra 65 MOA outer circle, or what they call their MRS, their multi-reticle system. Getting into basics of the design and body, the body itself is made out of 7075 T6 aluminum, which is fantastic. It is a higher durability material than your more basic 6061. In terms of the build design, we have somewhat of a micro body. It's not quite a micro red dot, but it's also considerably smaller than an Aimpoint T1, T2 style. We do have exposed but recessed windage and elevation turrets, and on top we have our solar charging panel, which is going to be one of the main features of this red dot. On the left-hand side of the body, we have our rubberized plus and minus buttons, which adjust our illumination. In terms of illumination settings, we have 8 daylight settings and 4 night vision settings. I hear the night vision settings work pretty well. Haven't tested them out. As far as the daylight settings go, it gets more than bright enough when in manual mode, which we'll talk about in a minute. Now, getting into the footprint of the optic itself, it is 509T compatible, which is interesting to say the least. Now, Holosun says that you shouldn't mount it to a pistol. However, you probably can mount it to a pistol, but it probably just won't last all that long. I have seen some people do it fine over a few hundred rounds, but I would be interested to see how it hold up over, like, say 1 to 5,000 rounds as opposed to a few hundred. I'm personally not a huge fan of the 509T footprint just because while it is fine, it's less popular than the Acro and has less aftermarket options. And in terms of being robust, it's certainly less robust than something like an Aimpoint T1, T2. The only advantage that it has is because of that 509T footprint, you can shrink the body of the optic quite a bit, which they've done on the SCRS. Talking about the actual mount itself, well, there's plenty of material here, and it does have a very large crossbolt and a hex nut, which I do like. There is no integrated recoil lug, so that's a little bit disappointing, though as we'll get into later on, all of those things are kind of immaterial because it holds up really well. Other than that, glass quality is good. It is going to have a very noticeable blue tint when you're looking at a white background. However, if you're not looking at a white snow-covered hillside, it's going to be much less noticeable than in some of the GoPro footage that I'm going to have. If you're looking at a more neutral background, it's not going to be quite as noticeable. Moving on to the way that the optic actually works, and the main reason somebody would buy one of these things is that we have a solar panel on top that will actually charge the internal battery. It is not a removable battery, it is an internal rechargeable battery, unlike all of the other Holosun offerings, except for, of course, their pistol-mounted SCS red dots. Starting out with modes of operation, you technically have 3 settings. You have a auto low, a auto high, and then a manual mode for your brightness. In reality, however, you only have one setting, and that is going to be the manual mode, because anytime you're in a dynamic lighting environment, usually using a white light indoors or anything else like that, the auto modes are basically worthless. If you are outdoors in a very stable lighting position, they might work just fine. However, if you go inside of a building or use it in any sort of dynamic environment whatsoever, especially with a powerful white light, this is a 2000 lumen light, it will absolutely disappear. So I only use it in manual. As soon as I took it out of the box, the first thing I did was disable the auto settings. Now, when it comes to the raw battery life that you can get from the internal battery, I have heard wildly varying numbers from both Holosun's website, their instruction manual, and from people online, anywhere from 1 to 50,000 hours. Realistically, it is on the lower side of the spectrum, just for whatever reason they're using a smaller internal battery. This is a very small optic, so there's not a lot of room to put a big battery in here. So it's probably on the lower end of things, somewhere between 1 and 10,000 hours. That is also going to greatly depend on the battery setting that you're using. The reason why that isn't horrible, at least from a paper perspective, is the fact that the solar cell on top will actually recharge your internal battery. So anytime you're using it outdoors, it is naturally going to be charging up the battery. Now, the battery takes an extremely long time to charge. I believe Holosun rates it at 100 hours of charging from 0 to 100%. Now, that might sound like an extremely long time to have your optic outdoors. However, it is important to note that if you're using it outside, it will charge up faster than it depletes, which is a good and bad thing. Usually for battery health, you do not want to be draining it to 100% and then filling it up to 100%. That will actually degrade the battery faster. Usually you want to keep it between 20 and 80% in terms of maximum battery health. That would in theory extend the life of the battery itself, because keep in mind this is an internal battery that is not removable, it is not user serviceable, so when that battery eventually can no longer hold a charge and you have to send it back to Holosun, if they exist in the next 5 to 15 years, they will have to replace that internal battery for you. Now also on top of the battery degradation, keep in mind that the solar cell on top will degrade over time, especially as you're using it. It has taken a little bit of damage from some stuff that we'll get into a little bit later on. So while you might think this would be like an infinite battery life system, it's really not. And when you compare it to something like a stored 2032, that's also going to last between 5 and 15 years before that battery can no longer hold a charge. It's not really that much longer of a system. So while it sounds nice on paper, are you actually getting anything from that? Now, I know a lot of people like it for the solar failsafe, where the battery is 100% dead, but you're outside in a good lighting environment, and so you actually get some reticle just based off of the solar failsafe feature, which technically is a feature, but again, if you have a regular red dot, you just change the battery. If you have this red dot, you just send it back to Holosun and wait 2 to 4 weeks to get it back. But quibbles aside, the SCRS will provide you a usable battery life from 5 years in the worst case scenario to probably 15 years in the best case scenario. So it is still usable, of course. Now, things that it will not be good for is a system where it is moving around constantly, but is not getting sunlight. So for instance, if you're using this in a concealed role, it is staying in a bag, in a truck, or something like that, where it is moving around a lot using that battery, but it is not getting any charge. Because again, it does have a reduced battery life compared to a traditional 2032, where you might be measuring it in 5, 10, 15,000 hours, whereas this, especially at a higher brightness setting, might be only getting 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 hours of battery life. So if it's moving around a lot and not being charged up, it's going to die considerably faster than a more traditional style battery will. So it's good for everything else, but not a system where it's not getting charged, but it's moving around a lot, like again, a bag gun, a truck gun, etc., etc.
I do wonder if you were to drop a fully loaded rifle on top of this thing, if the 509T crossbolt system would actually hold up to that much weight. Maybe Focustripp is going to have to throw one of these things against a boulder for us.
Well, I couldn't find a boulder because everything was covered with snow, but I did happen to have an AR-500 steel plate laying around. As with most of my drop tests, the first drop is shoulder height onto just dirt and rocks or just the ground where I am. In this case, it was just packed ice and snow, which is probably not the hardest drop in the world. And after the first drop, we experienced no point of impact shift, which is always a good sign, because the mounting design, there is less contact and there's only a single cross bolt on the 509T footprint versus 4 bolts and a lot more contact area on a T1, T2 mount. So there is a little bit of cause for concern there. So moving on to the shoulder height drop onto the AR-500 steel plate, unfortunately it didn't land quite flush, so the optic itself didn't take all of the impact. So it was still a hard impact, but not the hardest impact possible. We got exactly 0 point of impact shift. Now, I wasn't quite satisfied with the first impact that we got. It wasn't quite hard enough for my test, so I did give it a second drop onto the AR-500 steel plate, which usually I don't do, but again, the first drop was just a little bit subpar. The second drop landed perfectly. The optic itself took the brunt of the impact. It did crush in the aluminum a little bit and kind of the corner of the solar panel as well. The optic is of course still 100% functional, and there was a minor point of impact shift, I believe about 2 inches down at about 36 yards, so about 6 MOA. That is not bad whatsoever. Keep in mind there was an extra drop on the AR-500 steel plate, so as far as the mount goes, even though it is simplistic, it works. Even though the 509T footprint does have less contact area, it works. So I don't have any complaints. And now you can always throw in a nicer mount because 509T mounts do exist, but again, they're just not quite as popular as other mounting systems on the market. So when we talk about value, why the heck would you buy one of these things? There are really 3 benefits. Number 1, it's small. Number 2, it's not particularly expensive. These are under $300, even cheaper for this model, even cheaper for me. And number 3, while it doesn't give you that much of a tangible benefit over a traditional battery system, the solar panel plus internal rechargeable battery does work. So it is a good value in terms of its feature set. In terms of what it does, it's really the only optic like this on the market for a rifle anyways. However, when you ask the question, is it better than a SIG Romeo 5? Not really. The only area where it would have a benefit over that is going to be the fact that the glass quality is better for night vision performance, again, from what I've heard, and it is smaller, so if you do want to use it as a offset dot, as a top-mounted dot, or for some reason as like your dedicated passive aiming solution. Now I might sound like I'm being a little bit harsh on the optic. Keep in mind that it does work perfectly fine. It is a tough little bugger as well. There are areas where it can perform quite well in your system, but as just a standalone rifle red dot, I'd probably still just take a SIG Romeo 5. Now, again, you have to put it in the right application, in the right use case for you personally, where you think it can shine. It's still just kind of niche, at least from where I'm sitting right now. So, with all of that out of the way, guys, let me know what you think of the Holosun SCRS in the comments down below. If you think it is worth the price premium for the features that it has, which are quite novel. It is a interesting design. I would like to see them continue to refine and improve this in the future. But once again, with all that out of the way, guys, thank you so much for watching. I hope you all enjoyed. I will see you in the next one. God bless.